I think that goes, the next thing that we're kind of talking about is the evidence-driven advocacy. And there is, yeah, it's the next one in the presentation, and I think it's complete. We'll see. All right. So I think what's interesting is what is the most effective messaging that's out there, and based on what we were just talking about, one of the things that John mentioned earlier was this idea of integrating into every program, project, into the process an advocacy component, which is an interesting idea, and I think with the absence of organizations that are going to be solely focused on advocacy, that's the way in which we need to go. So the question is, in addition to that, if budgeting and having a budget tracker, how do those two go hand in hand, and how do you finance something like that? How do you find that person who understands the budget and get them to be, is it something where you can just buddy up with someone, right? So you get a friend who understands that, so someone from the Ministry of Finance or someone from external who really understands the way that the budgeting process works, so that you can tap into their knowledge. Maybe they're not WASH experts, but that doesn't matter. They understand the budget process. Or is it trying to train someone? Where do we find those people? Or how do we create an environment that allows for that? Jane, you were talking about, and so I'm going to actually pose this to you. You were talking about how that's a huge piece of what you're doing, and maybe it's the collective you of IRC in Uganda, or maybe it's you specifically, Jane, who's responsible for that piece. But how did that come about, that this budgeting, I mean, that's not something that my understanding is that you had necessarily training, right? That you don't come from a finance background to go through this process. So I'm just curious as to how that all happened in Uganda and how you got to the level and what you would maybe recommend to other folks for that. And that's not really evidence-driven advocacy. We're going to get to that in a second, but that was just a follow-up question. So Jane, you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. This whole process, I must have started with our work in SSS in 2010, when we actually opened offices in the districts, in Lira district up north and in Kabarole district in the southwest. And we went in specifically to work with the local government on issues of functionality, improving O&M, working with the water user committees, doing action research around the community-based maintenance system. And along the way, the local governments themselves, including the technical teams and the elected councillors, kept referring back to, if you want to do more, if you want to ensure more participation of the communities in taking care of the water sources, you need to also bring in the technical people. We have hand pump mechanics that have been trained. We stay with them. Probably they just need some support, some facilitation, because our sub-counties are big. So that's where the conversation started from. And then we also knew from the technical team that they were not too happy with the 70% every year of the conditional grant going to new investments. And it was becoming very political in the sub-county and district councils. So it was an emerging issue. It wasn't an issue that just came out of the blue. It was an emerging issue, and we had several dialogues with the sub-counties, with the water users at the water sources themselves, to begin to collect the evidence that we needed, and supporting the district water officers to really put those ideas and those proposals in their own planning and budget statements. Each year they have to write statements around their planning, around their budgeting, which they present to their councils, to the district council during the budget conference. So in around 2011, WASNET rolled out a budget tracking exercise in 21 districts. And we're basically looking at how much moves from the center to the district. Not so much the conditional grant itself, but the conditional grant and other grants or other resources that the district receives, because the districts are full corporate bodies, they can raise other resources. But then again, in around 2012, that's when we did our own budget tracking in our 2 districts using the life cycle cost approach. So bottom line is it's something that we started. It's a process, and then we saw that the districts actually needed that increase. It's not an increase that came from the national. It's a fight for increase that is coming from the local governments themselves, and especially also we got more evidence from USNet, from their own budget tracking, where we got to know that there are some districts that actually don't need 70% every year for new investments. They are short in terms of supervising, in terms of monitoring, in terms of community participation, in terms of working with the hand pump mechanics to do routine maintenance and improve O&M. So they were also pushing for one review of the allocation formula, which was done, but the 70 remained. But they were also pushing for flexibility within the grant, that the district assembly, the district council can sit and say, last year we had the 70% from our grant. This is what we did with it. But next year, these are the needs. And if the needs are not purely on investment, then they can put that money on other issues, on other factors within the grant. That was presented to the sector. It was presented to the Ministry of Finance, but the Public Procurement Authority body said no. So because then they know that when it comes to procurement, they were not prepared to engage with the local governments in supporting them to understand the procurement implications of changing the formula. So briefly, that is how it has evolved. And we see it as a long-term process. I don't think it's something that will be finalized, very soon. And we want to try it, especially for this financial year that started in July, because this financial year the national percentage for water and environment increased by about 12%. And we want to see whether the grant will also increase for the different districts that we work in, and also those districts that where our partners work in, like SNV in West Nile, Plan, AMREF, World Vision, that are also involved in improving O&M. So that is briefly what motivated and started off this whole process of increasing the budget for O&M.
Great. So, any other comments from online? Okay. So, a couple of things. To talk a little bit about evidence-driven advocacy, that's been a reoccurring theme that's come up over and over throughout the day, that you need the evidence. What I'm hearing, though, from most of our conversations is that we're doing more of the second bullet that you see, creating the evidence base when needed. based on what the issue is, as opposed to using existing evidence to drive advocacy. So my question to everyone here is there a massive lack of the evidence that we actually need and we're collecting the wrong information? Or are we not using the information that exists as effectively as we could be because we've identified alternative issues and we've shifted the focus? So was the question, I don't know if that question was clear, but I'm just curious as to the reason most of what we've talked about today has been we identified this, so therefore we created the evidence base that was needed. And is that because the evidence doesn't exist, or because we don't know where to find it? Or, you know, what is the reasoning for creating this evidence base as opposed to using the evidence that already exists?
Do you think the evidence? Sorry, do you think the evidence base is created for advocacy, or is it because of the evidence?
So I think that there's a problem often that's identified, and so that, well, okay, so there is two different reasons I think that evidence is created, or I should say collected. It's not created, but that research is done to build the evidence base. I think a lot of times the evidence base that currently exists is mostly academic, and it's done for academic purposes, and therefore it is not useful for policy and advocacy unless it's something big and major or that has very specific effects on something. Like, so the glass report and components of the glass report and the work that Sophie Tremolay is doing around the budget tracking and finance. Hello, welcome.
Hello.
We Tobias just arrived, so thank you very much. We'll do an introduction, Tobias, in just a second. And Jeanette is on.
For Uganda.
Yeah. Please go ahead, Jane.
For Uganda, we have more than enough evidence. We have overwhelming evidence. I think the problem is we are either not using it well for the purpose for which we have it or we collected it. We are not packaging it well. And as using the language that we use in IRC, our ask is not clear. When you have all these statistics and all these qualitative messages and all these testimonies, how are you packaging all that so that you are asked that which you want to see changed is clear for the national level, for the district level? And then what platform, what fora are we using to really put across that ask? When we did the advocacy around hand pump mechanics, and that resulted into the creation of hand pump mechanics associations, the starting point was evidence. IRC in Uganda and SNV in Uganda had the evidence, which we packaged, which we put together and submitted to the ministry. Then that evidence, they called it initially a concept note, then it developed into many other things. By the time we realized, it had become a ministerial statement, and the minister himself presented it in top policy meeting. So how we package our messages and our facts and our ask is something that we need to think through very carefully. We know very well, we who come from countries and cultures that are basically oral, that reading sometimes is a challenge. Not because they can't read, but that is not how we are socialized. So how do you package it in such a way that it will attract the attention of this group of technical people, this group of policy makers, to look at it? So we need to go back, revisit our documentation, right from process documentation, revisit our facts, revisit our presentation, revisit our timing timing is very important. So all those things combined will probably enable us to look at the evidence that we have and see and make sure that it is used. And then lastly, what I realized sometime back when I just gotten into advocacy and engaging more with the poverty analysis unit of the Ministry of Finance, government is so keen on methodology. The methodology that we use to generate this evidence sometimes comes under fire. Not because we are not experts in it or we don't know how to do it, but I think we take a number of things for granted. Because the Ministry of Finance will ask, so what is the sample? Is that representative enough? And then you start. You see, because of resources, and then they say, no, that is not representative. It cannot form a basis for us to make a decision on. And then how we form our coalitions, how we form our the partnerships. And that's where we scored big on the Hand Pump Mechanics Association. We had SNV on board, we had Water Aid on board, we had World Vision, all those organizations that have either field offices in any part of the country were brought on board. So where IRC could not go, because we have only 2 districts where we operate, we could get all these facts and figures and testimonies from the other districts. So it becomes representative. And they say, okay, I think we need to listen to you. And by the time we realized, it was an undertaking in the Joint Sector Review, and then it became policy. Now we have Hand Pump Mechanics Associations in all the 111 districts in the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine, go ahead.
Okay, just based on what you asked, I think both are 50-50. Sometimes we don't have evidence to support the policy, and that's why the research becomes very important in WASH. Sometimes we might actually be lacking statistics. And that's why the example I gave of WSP went of their way to do a county-wide county profiles of sanitation was critical because of the gap. And when they achieved, it became like really a yardstick of how counties were recurring in terms of their input in the sanitation budget. So it is sometimes the information is lacking, sometimes it's available but it's not being used. And I think I will highlight in my presentation where, for example, we have the legal system in the country, but the right standards do not work. So the evidence is available, but the people is not given.
So it's more of a communications issue, yeah.
I mean, absolutely, and I think what Council said is just that really hit the nail on the head. I think you said at the start a lot of the evidence is academic based. So that's one of my pet peeves is the way that the branch of academia seems to be trying to sort of capture the whole discussion about evidence, like where the ones to understand what evidence is, and everyone else forget about it. But putting that to one side, one of the areas where I think we do the most advocacy at the moment is about strengthening national systems. And I just go back to, and they're not evidence systems, they're monitoring systems, they're budget systems. It's about data transparency. It's about the user's right to know. It talks to Feliciano's presentation, where 3 different branches of government are completely online data. If that data was easy to access, was made available, people could pick that up. Instead of having to send some field, it digs down into it, and it becomes a case study.
Right.
So I think a really critically important part of advocacy has to be about building national monitoring systems and making the data that's collected in those national monitoring systems available.
Great. So it's about 5 minutes to 3 here, and we have a presentation next. Our next item is a presentation by Catherine and